This is One Ogden. I'm John Miles.
Pat Nielsen lives in Morgan, where he writes a series of horror stories under the pen name Dean Patrick. The stories focus on Tara Drake, a demonic temptress, and an allegory for addiction. It's drawn from Pat's real-life experience as a former addict, and his first two books, The Lady Mephisto and Tara's Sabbath, are available at booksellers everywhere.
So, I do want to talk about your novels, but let's go back first to just like, when did you start writing?
I started in graduate school, and I didn't really know what I was going to do when I went to college, but I was excellent at writing and English and literature, and those classes just came easy to me. Mm-hmm. And then graduate school just was a natural flow to that. And right out of graduate school, I was going to do a PhD program, but was hired on at a biotechnology company, right as a technical writer. That's how I started it. So I worked for them for 5 or 6 years and just branched out into different levels of technical writing. I wrote for NASA, of all places, back in 2003, wrote for the Space Shuttle team. But my professional writing as an author came about just in 2019.
Oh.
And it happened really in and out of recovery.
So you were one of those people who actually went to school for English and then
I did.
actually made a career out of it.
I did. I sure did. It did. It came natural to me, and the classes did. And graduate school was I thought it was fun, where people were struggling and suffering. I thought it was just a riot.
Yeah.
I really did, because I enjoyed it. And so I have master's degrees in professional writing and humanities and literature, and took off in technical writing immediately.
Yeah.
And the technical writing can branch out to anything. I've worked in, like I say, NASA. I worked there. I've worked at the biotechnology companies like Fisher Scientific, pre-IPO startup software companies, and now I'm write for Mindtree and Microsoft as a lead director there of the writing project. And we work on the HoloLens project, the actual military headgear that has AI in it in combat.
Okay.
So it's flexible.
Wow.
It really is.
So do you ever do you get to use flowery language, talking about the capabilities?
Technical writing can be an art. It truly can. Depends on what field you're in. I think in IT it's a little more rigid because you have to be accurate with software specs and hardware specs. But I've been doing it so long that I see a lot of creativity in it. And making like a white paper come alive or a presentation come alive, that just takes a lot of time and experience. But it does utilize all the things I learned right from graduate school, from the foundations of it.
And so when you start writing fiction, did you jump right into a novel, or was it short stories first?
It was short stories first. And of all places, I wrote the story She, which is where the main character that I've developed, villain, her name is Tara Drake. That's the character who is the theme throughout my books. But I wrote a short story about her when I was in prison, of all places. And I was just in a bad spot, John, a real bad spot. And this story came out, and it was kind of a metaphor of addiction itself, and it kind of took the form of sexual addiction. But I saw so much while in and out of these awful places about addiction and what people were suffering and struggling through. So I turned it into this awful character, this monstrous woman, this demonic woman. And it was published in 2019, but my wife always told me, and I had a lot of friends and supporters always say to me, you've got to write some novels about your experience, about what you've gone through and how this has happened. And horror took on its own flavor. So I got many short stories in different anthologies after that one. But my first novel came through TWB Press when I was really searching for a publisher to work with books. Mm-hmm. And his name is Terry Wright, the publisher of TWB Press, and he took on the first book. And it's kind of blossomed from there. He originally rejected the book.
Oh, really?
I had kind of floated the novel to 4 or 5 different publishers, and I had a couple of offers wanting to contract with me on it, but I really wanted him because I had seen the work he's done and how he works with authors to make them so much better, and just a terrific editor. And he rejected it initially because the language was too wordy for him. It was a kind of a heavy type of language. I tried to emulate a lot of the older school fiction that's considered stream of conscious, like a William Faulkner or James Joyce type. He didn't think that would work, and I wrote him back, and I urged him, please reconsider. I gave him the whole story, and he said, okay, let's give it a shot. What do we got to lose? He enjoyed the story very much, and he appreciated coming back to him that way. And it was a hit on his publisher's site. And the second book was published in 2023, just last year, and it was the number one selling book on the publisher's site.
Okay.
That's the second one of that series, and the third one will be out later this year.
Oh.
Shooting for October. The draft is almost done,
Nice.
and then we start the real work. But that's how it started.
Interesting. Where did you first get published your short stories?
It was an anthology called Infernal Ink, and the publishing process is grueling. It's quite competitive. I was introduced to a site called Duotrope by a friend of mine years and years ago, and that site lists all the publishers and agents that are in the country. And it just takes digging into those publishers and submitting and writing query letters and putting together compelling arguments for a publisher to accept. And you go through rejections.
You're making a case for your book to be published.
You
or
are.
Your story.
You're
yeah.
literally making a case for
Huh.
it to be published. Now, once you get published more and more, it becomes a lot easier because
Yeah.
your name's out there. And with TWB Press, I didn't have a presence at all on social media. I didn't have a website.
Yeah.
So I started that, and now it's a professional website that I have a Marquee Books is a place is doing. His name's Marcus. He's a professional web designer, developer, and now that's out there, and that's doing wonderful too. I think that's where sales can be driven. But
Yeah.
so the first part was really researching, finding out how to get into the game, finding publishers that are interested, getting a website presence, then getting published, going through the whole publishing process, which is, of course, you're writing your drafts, outlining, storyboarding, getting everything to a perfect pitch, then working with an editor and making it even more polished, and then getting it out there and letting critics take a crack at you.
Yeah.
And it's quite a thing. Now, the next process, of course, would be finding an agent that would see my novels and work and want to maybe put it on a screenplay somewhere. That's a tough process. Haven't had any luck yet, but that's what happens.
Right. So let's talk about the story first. So your first novel is called
The Lady Mephistopheles.
Yeah. Okay.
And it's kind of the Latin term for the devil.
Right.
And this character really takes on that persona. But from the original short story, I developed her into a metaphor of all addictions. And it, for me, as an alcoholic, and battling that my whole life, and I take this character to heart as a real entity in my life, because she is. But she's also this, I think, metaphor for what so many of us can suffer through, whether it's alcohol or drugs or even food or sexual addictions or addictions of things that we don't have control over until we recognize we have it. So I turned her into this character who would torment and take on anyone who gets in her way. And as the second book developed, she goes, I trace her back even to biblical times. I've tried to really create her as this Luciferic, satanic character who is the ruler of this world while I have characters battle her. The first book was based really on my life and an alcoholic who relapses and goes through this awful spiral into madness, fighting her. The second one is this character's brother, who's a homicide detective out of Houston, based on my brother Josh. It's a real character. He's been part of this thing from the beginning. And he's also the main character in the third book as well. And he has these series of characters that he comes across fighting this entity and finding out what happened to his brother in the first book. And it's just been quite a journey seeing, I think, how these metaphors of addiction have really helped me overcome alcoholism, have helped me resonate with people who suffer with addiction and alcohol and drugs, whatever it may be, while also at the same time getting into a story that scares them to death and troubles them. That's really the goal of any horror story.
Yeah.
And but that part's been fun.
Yeah. Because what's the second one called?
Terra's Sabbath.
Okay, right. Yeah, I really liked in the first one, you kind of talk about how he's recovering, but then he basically just encounters a few triggers, and then that's when she shows up.
She shows up. His name is Stephen Paul. It's based on my own person. But it's during the pandemic, of all things.
Yeah.
The setting is.
I thought that was interesting.
Yeah, he's in the setting, and he finds she's in his home, and she seduces him, not sexually in any way, but just in a way that gets him to drink.
Uh-huh.
And that first drink takes him on this wild ride, and he fights her at the end, of course. And I don't want to give away any ending, but he succumbs to her in so many ways. And when he reaches out to his brother, who's in Houston, is this cop. The cop doesn't really take notice of what's really going on until the second book. He wants to find out what this is all about. And I'll tell you, John, it also takes on the role in the second book of small town America. I kind of use Morgan,
Yeah.
Utah, and I turn it into Duncan.
Yeah.
And I kind of show how witchery and devils can take over small town America if we're not careful, and see how to battle that kind of evil and how to fight it. So I kind of use that background with this character and with the kind of the good versus evil concept, and it's worked out.
Yeah, that's interesting. Maybe I'm totally off base here, but I'm curious about that part. Like, there's an element to a lot of like recovery programs about letting go of control, and then there is that element of this that like there is somebody sort of trying to push you toward that stuff.
I think what's helped me is when I write a scene with Tara destroying someone, or someone facing her, or her thugs, as I call them, the witches that she has part of her, I will many times flash back to scenes of my own life when I was really bad off in alcohol and drugs, and the times where I was, I'll tell you, John, fighting tooth and nail for every moment of life and losing everything. And when I'm able to take on these characters and flesh them out, I see myself now still overcoming that and still having this huge monster on me. And just in a couple months in June, I'll celebrate 8 years sober.
Oh, great. Congrats.
And it's a miracle. But I can see during these past 8 years how this writing and these characters and being part of the process has helped me therapeutically work these demons out.
Yeah.
Because I'll see something that I used to be, and I'll make that a character.
Yeah.
And I'll have someone overcome that character, whether it's a witch or a devil or a troll, if you will. And it allows me to see that. And there's times it's very emotional for me when I'm putting together some of these scenes. For example, there's a scene I'm working on right now that takes place in a jail. And I'll go back and I'll think about the times I was there.
Yeah.
Or the times I was in a recovery center and trying to get out and wondering if I'll get out. So that process, and then seeing it come alive and seeing it online and seeing people buy it and working with the publisher and trying to make even bigger things happen, it makes it all worth every minute of it. And it helps.
Yeah.
It helps a lot. It really does.
Were you writing the first one like during COVID? Like, did you kind of use COVID to help you
I did.
do a novel?
I absolutely did, and I'll tell you how it came about. The actual book came about. The opening scene was there, but it was a cold night, and I remember walking outside in my front yard, and my neighbor had just gotten out of the hospital with COVID, and he drove up, and I looked at him across the fence there, and our yards are right here, and he looked like he was dead. And he looked at me, and he was grateful that I touched base with him and kept in touch with him when I was in the hospital, because I did. I wanted to find out, hey, how can I help? And I looked at him, and I thought, God, what is going on here? This thing really almost got him. And I remember watching him drive off, and I thought, he shouldn't even be driving. He was that still sick. And I went back in, and I thought, this character could be another one that Tara Drake destroys and did destroy. And so the story just came alive. And I have him in a chapter where he's in a bar scene and he's drinking heavily, and she comes in and takes over him. But the whole COVID thing of what we were going through,
Right.
Tara Drake came alive with that.
Right.
She really did. She exposed the vulnerability we were all going through,
Yeah.
especially in smaller towns.
Yeah.
And that's how it started. It really did. Seeing my neighbor come through that,
Yeah.
and making him a character in the book. He gets killed, but
Well, it's got to happen.
It's got-
in a book like Lady
That's
Mephistopheles. But so I'm guessing you kind of saw it being a series when you started, also.
I did. I didn't know it was going to be a trilogy, and I think after this book is done, it opens itself up to some of the minor characters in their own books. I have a character in this one right now who's a serial killer, and his name is Rex Brody. He goes by the name of Mr. Boogie, and I think he's terrifying. And he could be worth his own book. And he's based on a martial arts friend of mine that I met at Foley's Mixed Martial Arts, of all
Oh,
things.
really?
His name's Chris Kennedy, and so I see people and meet them, and they become these characters. But when I first finished the first book, I did see a second one. I really did, but I didn't know how far it would go.
Yeah.
I really didn't. And when it starts to really move forward, and these characters become more and more natural, and new ones come about. And of course, I got the support of my publisher saying, "Yeah, let's keep going. This could be fantastic." And series they do better. And I think that they're a better presentation to an agent. They're a better presentation in marketing when you're building your websites and you're looking at the publisher sites and Amazon and Barnes & Noble. It just has a better product overall.
Yeah.
But at first, no, John. It was that book was going to be kind of my memoir of all I had gone through in alcoholism. But as it finished, and as the second one opened up immediately with the brother character taking over, based on my own brother, Josh. His name is Marion Paul, the second character. From there, then I knew the series was on, and I think when you have a series, it makes the process a lot more enjoyable because you're not pigeonholed into you're stuck. You can just keep branching out on it.
Right.
And then when new characters pop up worthy of their own book, that becomes exciting. That really does.
Yeah.
When the Lady Mephistopheles was done, Terry, the publisher, had sent me, we were probably looking at 30, 40 different images of who could be the model, who could be Tara Drake. And my wife was looking at them all, and she was emailing me back and saying, they look too cheesy. They just don't look the part. You got to find someone who knocks this look out. Really something who has not only the seductive level, but terrifying. So she was browsing around and she found this Gothic model. Her name is Alfia Malkina. She lives in Moscow, Russia. And she showed me a few pictures of her, and she was on this Gothic website, and it was it. The cover model on that first one, I sent it to Terry. He said, "This is her. There's no question about it." But getting the permission to use her was a whole nother story. I had to find out who she was, where she lived, how to get the rights to her. And I couldn't do that until I found the Russian equivalent to Facebook, and it's called VK. And I found her husband.
Really?
I found her husband. So I sent him a message. I made an account in VK. I sent him a message. And he emailed me back, John, within a couple of hours. He said, "We would be honored to have her work on your cover."
Nice.
So we got that, and then for the second book, she did a whole photo shoot for the website and that second book. Now the sad thing is that with the war now in Ukraine, I haven't been in touch with her.
Yeah.
I haven't heard from her in over a year,
Oh, that's too
and
bad.
still got the rights and so on for the third book with what we have. But that is how that started, and that's where it is now. It's almost a story in its own.
Yeah.
Think about it.
Yeah, I know. I think about it every time I see her on your covers.
Because she made Tara come alive with the look.
Yeah, yeah. And so I know that the Lady Mephistopheles is on Amazon,
Amazon and Barnes & Noble, and Book
Kindle,
Nook,
and all that.
Kindle,
yeah.
right.
But the second one isn't yet. It's
Second one
only-
is out there too.
Oh, it is?
Yeah, it was the top seller last year.
But
Terror
is it
Sabbath.
on Amazon?
It is. Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Book Nook, and of course the publisher's website and my website as well.
Yeah.
And it just knocked it out of the park last year for all of his authors. It was the top seller.
Yeah.
Really cool.
Does having a pen name make you feel like disconnected from the reaction of it?
It can. And people have asked me that and asked me why. And I've always just flipped my middle name and my first name. And Dean Patrick, I thought, had a nice sound to it and look.
Yeah.
And it does.
Yeah.
And talked to Terry about it many times, talked to my wife and friends, and it does. It has a great look and feel to it.
Yeah.
But when we're talking and I'm meeting new people,
Yeah.
I'm just Pat.
Right. Right. I see. But yeah, then you have like friends who don't know you as Dean Patrick, right? And
You're
then-
right.
Yeah.
You're right.
And they're, yeah, looking
For example,
your stuff or whatever.
when I'm at Foley's, for example, I have an office there that he's leased out to me, and a lot of
Oh.
characters who came out of there have written a lot of stuff there. But people will come in, and because he lets me talk to as many people as I want to there, and this is the writer. I got it now.
Ah,
And
that's cool.
So Dave Foley, I met him about 6 years ago. Been training with him ever since. And during COVID, I needed a place. My whole career's been remote since then, and I needed a place to get out and work.
Ah.
And he said, "Pat, I got an extra room. We'll work out a fee for it." And I've been writing there ever since. And Dave Foley's also a character in the first
Oh,
book.
really?
I mean, in the second book, he's a character.
Nice.
He gets taken on by another villain that Tara's very close with. His name is Adrian Cain, and he's actually Cain from biblical times.
Oh, okay.
That Cain. And so Dave became a character in the second book, fighting this Cain character. But Dave's been instrumental in my recovery and in these characters and stories.
Oh,
And
that's great.
It's very cool.
Yeah.
And the training, too, in
Right.
martial arts has been another part of recovery that's been so healing.
Uh-huh.
It
I
really
love it
has.
down there. And I bet, so you got to know Dustin Booker, who's...
Absolutely.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, Dustin Booker does private classes there, and he's wonderful.
Yeah, right.
He hasn't made it into a book yet, but he...
Yeah, he's got that whole recovery mindset. Like,
He
I love
does.
watching what he's doing.
Yeah, he's
with all that.
fantastic. He does a lot of long distance running. He does some private lessons there. He's a martial artist too.
Yeah, yeah.
And meeting those guys and being part of that world, Dave lets me assist with his classes now, and it's just a real part of recovery. All of that.
Yeah.
It really is. The training and these guys have become characters in the book. And how do you beat that?
Yeah, that's cool. So is he Dave Foley in the book, or does he have a
No,
different
his name is Burke Macy.
Burke Macy?
Burke Macy in
Nice.
the second book. Yeah.
Very nice. I'm going to watch for that.
He'll be in the third one too.
Cool.
Because Marion, the character based on my brother, and he relies on some of these folks to help him out, find out what happened to Steve, which was me in the first one. And so Burke will be in there working with him. And
Great.
Chris Kennedy was a jiu-jitsu instructor there. He went off to Cambodia. But when I met Chris and worked with him for a while, I thought, this guy could be a great, and he's become quite a monster.
Ah. Nice. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Those are like
He's
little Easter
Mr. Boogie
eggs.
in this one, and he's a terrifying character. He really is.
Oh, he inspired the
Yeah.
baddie. Was there a reason to change the name of the city to Duncan?
Yeah, there was actually. There was a good friend of mine in recovery. His name was Brock Duncan.
Oh.
And I just really, Brock is now, he's also sober to this day in recovery. And I loved his last name, and he lived up there.
Ah.
And he always pushed me to write too, books, of course. He knew what I did professionally.
Sure.
And I thought, well, I don't want to use the actual name itself, so I just chose Duncan. And for example, Ogden, I make it Odessa.
Okay.
Salt Lake City, I turned into Lake City.
I see.
And I think it gives the author more of a freedom to see the towns that I'm familiar with and I'm in it all the time, but choose a different name for the characters, and you can create a new environment and a new world, if you will.
Well,
for
right,
what
yeah,
they're
people
seeing.
looking for, I don't know, inconsistent, like Morgan doesn't have, bars or whatever.
Exactly.
That kind of stuff.
There's one bar there.
Yeah, yeah.
And I turned it into the real deal where Tara meets my neighbor. But I think if you use names that are, and people who know the area know it immediately. The cool thing is that the publisher for the second book, on the trailer he has on the publisher's side, there's a trailer there and there's a trailer on my website. It'll show, he used Google Maps and he'll show it.
I saw that.
And that's cool.
With Duncan laid over it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's the exact location.
Yeah, I like that.
So that was fun.
Did you grow up here?
No, I grew up in Houston, Texas.
Oh, okay.
And that's why those books go back and forth to Houston to here.
What made you come here?
It was in 2013, 2014. My grandparents had died. And my mother and my father were done with me in Houston. And the addiction had gotten so far, I burned all the bridges. I just did. And they offered me, hey, why don't you go up to Utah, take care of your grandma's estate? And I had nothing. I just didn't. So I came up here and I took care of that as much as I could, and I got in trouble again. It just hadn't hit yet, hadn't hit the rock bottom, John, as I think every addict needs to have happen for long-term sobriety. And then after getting in trouble here, just almost immediately, I started to realize what things that had to change.
Yeah.
And I met my wife, Lisa, here. And once I met her, we just started building a life here. And Duncan / Morgan really saved me too.
Huh.
And she did.
Yeah.
My wife, Lisa, has been part of this from the beginning. And she's the one who said, you've got to get, your writing is so strong, so powerful. You have to get it out there to people and touch people with it, even if it's this way. And she's been the catalyst with it. And that's why.
Yeah.
And I
that's
think,
cool.
and you know, the final time that really hit me with trouble, that is, was up in Park City. And I met a wonderful therapist up there, a counselor. Her name is Dodie, who was part of this whole journey too. And so when you get people like that in your life, this becomes your life and your world.
So, I mean, you kind of mentioned it, but what's after the third book?
I think there's going to be this character, Mr. Boogie, is going to become a book. This third book is called The Harlot and the Beast, and it'll be released October timeframe.
Oh, okay.
After that one, that's probably my next project, is that character, because he's become someone I think that is a great horror.
Yeah.
Serial killers are fascinating, and this one has a different slant with serial killing that my brother thought, hey, if the serial killers want us to get it done, this is how to do it.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
those are some projects I'm looking at, and
Yeah.
trying to find an agent.
Oh.
That's a tough deal.
Yeah, I don't know anything about that. Are you just kind of learning about it now?
I am.
Yeah.
I am. They're out there. It's kind of the same effort as getting published. It's just that next level. And agents want to see a body of work.
Sure.
They really do. They want to see something that's going to, unless you know somebody in the industry,
Yeah.
and that's tough to find.
Yeah.
It requires some luck.
Are you working on anything outside of this world?
Not yet. That's the world I've created. And
Yeah, yeah.
I'll
You
stick
wanna
within
stick
that
with
for a
it.
while. Yeah.
I would guess that it's probably best for people to get them from the publisher site.
Publisher site or my website.
Okay. What are those?
Or directly Amazon. And
Yeah.
Amazon is where the most money's made. So that's, of course, because you get the paperbacks there and so
Yeah.
forth. But you can get them in any. It's called twbpress.com, his publisher. My website is deanpatrickhorror.com.
Right.
And then, of course, the Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Book Nook. You can find them there as well.
So then I can get your anthologies and stuff also.
They're also on Amazon, absolutely.
Great. And on Dean
And my
Patrick
website.
Horror. Yeah.
Dean Patrick Horror.
Great. Well, thank you very much. I appreciate it.
John, this has been terrific.
Yeah.
Thanks a lot
Yeah,
for having
thank
me.
you.